It all began on a chilly autumn morning in Manhattan's bustling financial district. Thunder rumbled across the skyline, foretelling a storm that would shake the lives of the city's wealthiest elite. Christopher Wellington. A self-made millionaire stepped onto the polished marble floors of an imposing courthouse, a smirk playing on his lips. He believed he was untouchable. Yet behind him, a woman with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes clutched a faded photograph of their child. She was about to challenge the Titan, forcing him to admit a truth he had long denied. She was not merely a woman he once loved. She was the mother of his child. Christopher Wellington's life was the very definition of opulent success. Born in a small suburban town in upstate New York, he had clawed his way up from a modest upbringing to become a key player in the Manhattan real estate scene. At 36, he had a net worth reported by no less than Forbes to be in the hundreds of millions. His tall, imposing figure and sharp features made him the poster child for every magazine cover featuring success stories. He was a man who exuded confidence, a walking testament that the American dream was not just a myth. From dawn until midnight, Christopher's world revolved around constructing his empire, multi-million-dollar real estate developments, a chain of boutique hotels from Miami to the Hamptons, and a growing string of tech startups that he funded through aggressive venture capital partnerships. He was a man at the top of his game, always surrounded by admirers, employees, and an entourage of legal and financial advisors who shielded him from the petty problems plaguing most ordinary people. Yet if one were to look closer, they would see hairline cracks in his carefully sculpted life. His extravagant lifestyle, an apartment on Fifth Avenue, a penthouse in Dubai, a private yacht named Seize the Day, all hinted at a man obsessed with projecting an image of perfection, power, and wealth. He rarely stayed still, hopping from meeting to meeting, from dinner to dinner, forever hungry for more deals to conquer and more profitable opportunities to seize. Christopher had a father who had run a small hardware store. His mother had worked as a nurse at the local hospital. They had managed to send him to a decent public school, and from there Christopher earned scholarships that propelled him to Columbia University. He never lost sight of how hard he had worked to get out of the suburbs, but somewhere along the way, the virtues of humility and gratitude had become overshadowed by ambition and pride. People whispered that he was ruthless, an unstoppable force who would use any means necessary to secure a winning deal. In boardrooms, he was known for his unwavering stance. When Christopher Wellington wanted something, he did not stop until it was his. This attitude, so effective in business, bled over into his personal life. Women were occasional accessories to him. He had relationships, sure, but none lasted long enough to become truly meaningful. He lived by a single motto: "This world respects those who refuse to let emotions derail success." But his view would be tested in ways he could have never anticipated. One afternoon, in a rare moment of nostalgic introspection, Christopher scrolled through a list of old contacts on his phone. Their once familiar names had become an afterthought, now overshadowed by the partners, investors, and celebrities with whom he regularly dined. As he scrolled down, his eyes landed on a name he had sworn he had forgotten: Vanessa James. A tightening sensation crept into his chest. He had met Vanessa 5 years ago at a high society benefit gala, organized by a philanthropic group, spearheaded by none other than Melinda Gates, an event Christopher had attended purely for networking with potential investors. Vanessa had been different from the usual socialite set. She was there as a volunteer, guiding guests and collecting donations for an orphanage in the Bronx. Her genuine smile and unpretentious nature had initially intrigued Christopher, and by the end of the evening, he found himself drawn to her authenticity in a sea of artificial pleasantries. Back then, the relationship had moved swiftly. Their chemistry was electric, his drive and her compassion fused into a heady cocktail of passion. For a time, Christopher relished the sensation of caring about something beyond corporate growth and net worth. Yet as months passed, he noticed her unwavering moral compass, her insistence on him slowing down to pay attention to life beyond the next deal. It unsettled him. When she discovered she was pregnant, Christopher panicked. His carefully orchestrated life plan did not have room for a child yet, or for the challenge of a committed partner who might question his cutthroat strategies. And so, with the help of his lawyers and financial advisors, Christopher's initial solution was simple: pay her off, keep her quiet, and move on. He convinced himself it was better for both of them. After all, he was a man who understood the power of money, and that generosity would spare him from complicated emotional entanglements. Or so he believed. But Vanessa refused. No check Christopher offered could replace genuine support from the father of her unborn child. And so Christopher ended their relationship, emotionally distancing himself. Although he was never outright cruel, he was cold businesslike, as if severing a contract that no longer served his ambitions. He told people privately, "I had a fling. She's just the mother of my child." Nothing more. That phrase, seared into Vanessa's heart, would haunt them both for years. At first, Christopher convinced himself he was doing the right thing by stepping away. But he found himself over time consumed with a quiet guilt that manifested in restlessness and insomnia. He doubled down on his work to distract himself. The child, a boy named Ethan, was born a year later. For the first year of Ethan's life, Christopher knew hardly anything about him beyond the monthly child support checks. Unbeknownst to him, Vanessa never used all of that money. She worked 2 jobs, one as a physical therapist in a local clinic, and another as an online wellness coach, refusing to rely fully on Christopher's funds. Their lives might have continued in this distant, uneasy arrangement, had it not been for a fateful series of events that catapulted them back into each other's orbits. And soon everything Christopher thought he knew about love, commitment, and financial security would be challenged by a single, bold confrontation in court. In the months leading up to that autumn morning in Manhattan, the city had become a crucible for Christopher. Real estate prices were skyrocketing. The competition was stiffening, and regulators began to crack down on unorthodox development practices. Christopher's empire, though still imposing, was precariously balanced. He found himself leaning more heavily on his chief financial officer, Gabriel Nozick, and his star attorney, a high-powered litigator named Caroline Bentham. They had guided him through countless negotiations and potential lawsuits, but Caroline sensed he was more on edge than usual. He attributed his anxiety to the precarious deals on the table. But in the quiet moments late at night in his marble-floored penthouse, he acknowledged a whisper in the back of his mind. Regret. Ethan was almost 4 years old now. Christopher had a few photos, courtesy of an annual courtesy text from Vanessa, but no real relationship with his son. Occasionally he felt a pang of longing, but it was always overshadowed by the fear that his fatherhood would entangle him in deeper emotional responsibilities. In board meetings, Christopher retained his legendary composure, easily striking deals that less assured executives couldn't fathom. Behind the scenes, though, he was fielding more private calls from lenders concerned about his high leverage. He had financed a $500 million property development on Manhattan's Upper West Side, and the loan covenants came with strict terms. If any scandal touched him, if his carefully sculpted creditworthiness took a hit, the entire deal could unravel. Caroline's voice nagged at him. Stay out of public drama. Keep your record clean. One Friday evening, an unsettling rumor reached Christopher. A tabloid journalist from the New York Post was digging into his personal life. The rumor said the journalist had been trailing Vanessa, suspecting she might hold secrets about Christopher's private dealings. The last thing Christopher wanted was for his name and the fact he had fathered a child out of wedlock to become fodder for the paparazzi. If the tabloids discovered Vanessa, they might also discover the hush money Christopher had tried to give her to ease him out of the picture. That scandal, particularly in an environment of heightened corporate scrutiny, could imperil everything he had built. Desperate to quash the rumor, Christopher reached out to Vanessa. It was their first direct conversation in nearly 2 years. His tone, polished and formal, asked if she had been approached by any reporters and suggested that for her benefit and the child's, she should remain silent. Vanessa, furious and insulted, promptly ended the call. She had spent years struggling to make ends meet, raising Ethan with minimal support, monetary sure, but no fatherly presence. Now that Christopher had chosen to reach out, his only concern appeared to be his public image. Not a day after that conversation, Christopher received a summons to appear in family court. At first, he believed it was related to child support. But as he leafed through the documents, he realized Vanessa had initiated proceedings to legally establish paternity rights and demand shared responsibility for Ethan's well-being and possibly more. There was mention of a custody arrangement, plus potential compensation for emotional distress she had suffered. In the eyes of Christopher's legal team, this was a threat that could escalate into a very messy public affair. He tried to instruct Caroline to settle out of court. But suspiciously, Vanessa's filing included allegations that Christopher had coerced her to sign disclaimers, limiting her rights. If that part were true, it was borderline illegal and unethical. Facing these realities, Christopher felt cornered. The man who had always controlled every variable in his life faced a factor he could not simply buy or outmaneuver the moral and legal impetus of fatherhood. The upcoming hearing loomed an ominous cloud that threatened to release a downpour of scandal. In the safe confines of his penthouse, he began to realize that money could no longer shield him. The day he would walk into that courthouse and confront Vanessa in person again, after years of deliberate distance, was fast approaching. And for the first time, Christopher recognized genuine fear in himself. The man who had bested CEOs and real estate tycoons was now at the mercy of a single woman's pursuit of justice for a child he had mostly ignored. Before the tensions and looming court dates, there was once something resembling love. At the philanthropic gala, where they met, Christopher had been drawn to Vanessa's sincerity. She wore a simple black dress that clung modestly to her curves, and her gentle eyes sparkled with genuine empathy for the orphanage's cause. In a sea of practiced smiles and polite small talk, Vanessa spoke passionately about the children who needed books, tutors, and health care. Christopher, used to empty flattery from those who wanted a piece of his wealth, found her earnestness refreshing. One memory in particular warmed him. A month into dating, he had taken Vanessa on a date to see a Broadway show, The Phantom of the Opera. She had never been to a Broadway performance, and her wide-eyed wonder over the production had softened him, leaving him momentarily vulnerable. They walked through Times Square afterward, hand in hand, the bright neon lights painting their skin with vibrant colors. Christopher kissed her under one of those massive billboards. Vanessa, flushed with excitement, whispered, "I never knew a world like this existed. Thank you for showing it to me." That night, instead of retreating to his penthouse, they took a late-night stroll by the Hudson River. Vanessa talked about her dreams of opening a wellness center for low-income families. Christopher noticed how her eyes lit up when she spoke about helping others. Something in him stirred an unfamiliar sense of wanting to be a part of something that wasn't just about the next big business deal. It wasn't always perfect. Vanessa, being both pragmatic and compassionate, challenged Christopher. She asked him about his ambitions, questioning whether he ever took a day off. She teased him for never cooking his own meals, for using drivers, instead of ever taking the subway. "You're missing out on real life," she would say half-jokingly. Yet Christopher found her presence oddly comforting. She made him feel human, not just a money-making machine. As the months progressed, their relationship deepened in fits and starts. Vanessa brought him home to meet her parents, an unassuming couple living in a cramped apartment in Queens. Her mother, an elementary school teacher, had served them a homemade meal of arroz con pollo that Christopher found surprisingly delightful. He was used to filet mignon at five-star restaurants. That evening he saw a glimpse of family warmth he had rarely experienced since he left for college and became consumed by success. But the cracks began to form when Vanessa admitted she was pregnant. Christopher's immediate response was fear, if not quite terror. The unstoppable train of his career would require rethinking if he became a father. He worried about the potential scrutiny from business associates, and he dreaded the possibility of a messy relationship overshadowing his professional accomplishments. He had just secured the biggest partnership of his life, a real estate development with Morgan Stanley backing. A fatherhood scandal could unnerve financiers who looked for any whiff of instability before investing. At first, he tried to be supportive, promising to accompany Vanessa to doctor's appointments. But as time went on, he found excuses to miss them. An urgent meeting came up, he would text. Or, "I have to fly out to Singapore to finalize a deal." Vanessa put on a brave face, but her disappointment was palpable. The joyous news of her pregnancy, overshadowed by Christopher's mounting emotional distance, triggered endless arguments. Money started pouring in from Christopher's account. He wanted to ensure she never lacked medical care. But what Vanessa needed more than money was his presence and emotional investment. As Vanessa neared her second trimester, Christopher's behavior hardened. He began discussing options. He mentioned that if she chose not to keep the baby, he would understand. Vanessa was horrified by his callousness. She'd never considered that possibility. She recognized that Christopher was deeply afraid of losing what he thought made him powerful: his freedom, his brand, his unstoppable momentum. They argued intensely, and Vanessa ultimately moved out of the apartment he had leased for her in Midtown, returning to her parents' place. By the time Ethan was born, any semblance of romance between them had withered. Christopher had arranged for a private hospital suite and offered to cover all expenses, but he was not present. He was in Tokyo finalizing a high-stakes deal with a group of international investors. Vanessa cried alone in that hospital suite, listening to the coos and cries of her newborn son, uncertain about how a fatherless future for him might look. In the days that followed, Christopher maintained a cold distance. Though the monthly wire transfers arrived, he rarely called. Vanessa wrote him a few letters, asking for him to at least acknowledge Ethan to send a toy or a note. When no response came, she gave up. Now, 5 years after that lonely day in the hospital, the remnants of their once budding love story would erupt into a legal confrontation that neither had truly anticipated. Ethan James Wellington, or just Ethan James as Vanessa chose to have him registered, was an observant child. Though he was only 4 going on 5, his big brown eyes soaked in the world like a sponge. He didn't understand why his father wasn't around, but he asked questions from time to time. "Mommy, "Do I have a dad?" he once asked, turning those inquisitive eyes up at Vanessa holding a half-eaten peanut butter sandwich. Vanessa had paused, searching for the right words. "Yes, sweetheart, you do," she replied softly. "But he's busy with work right now." It was the gentlest explanation she could manage, though she knew the day was coming when Ethan would need a fuller truth. Despite her hardships, Vanessa strove to give Ethan a happy childhood. She found a supportive network in the local community center, enrolled Ethan in preschool, and made sure to supplement with reading time each night. She taught him kindness by example, bringing groceries to an elderly neighbor donating spare clothes to the church basement collection. Ethan was growing up surrounded by empathy and warmth, even if he lacked a father figure at home. Still, the financial burden weighed on her. Christopher's child support check arrived monthly, but Vanessa did not want to rely solely on those funds. She wished to instill in Ethan the same work ethic and sense of responsibility that had guided her life. She balanced her physical therapy shifts at a local clinic with her budding online wellness coaching business, often leaving her exhausted. Yet she pressed on, fueled by love for her son. On weekends, Vanessa took Ethan to the park. He loved the swings, the sensation of flight, as he soared through the air, legs pumping to go higher. Sometimes she'd catch a wistful expression on his face, a longing that maybe she couldn't fill. She suspected it was for a father. In the evenings after Ethan fell asleep, Vanessa sometimes found herself scrolling through social media, glimpsing Christopher's lavish life. She saw photos of him at red carpet events, laughing in the company of supermodels and famous business moguls. The shimmering world of wealth he inhabited felt a galaxy away from her modest reality. A flurry of emotions would coil in her chest: anger, resentment, heartbreak, and that lingering trace of love she wished she could shake. It was during one of those late nights that Vanessa began drafting a letter to Christopher, an appeal not for money, but for fatherly involvement. She poured her heart out on the page, describing Ethan's personality, the funny things he did, how he painted pictures of big buildings with someone tall standing next to him. She mailed it to Christopher's office, never expecting a response. Weeks later, a note came back, but not from Christopher. It was from his attorney, Carolyn Bentham. It read, "Mr. Wellington acknowledges receipt of your communication. However, any further contact should be addressed through my office to ensure clarity and proper documentation." That was the moment Vanessa realized Christopher had erected an impenetrable fortress around himself, one guarded by legal and financial advisors who protected him from any emotional vulnerability. This cold, legal reply ignited a resolve in Vanessa. She did not want Ethan to grow up internalizing that his father saw him as a burden, or worse, as a mere financial transaction. So she contacted a local advocacy group that helped single parents navigate family court. With their counsel, she decided to challenge Christopher in court, not for more child support, but for the emotional and legal rights Ethan deserved. If Christopher wanted to be absent, fine, but she would not allow him to trivialize her role or Ethan's in his life. Soon Vanessa's phone began ringing with unfamiliar numbers. Journalists, bloggers. Somehow word had leaked that a single mother was challenging a New York real estate mogul over parental involvement. Vanessa refused to comment, not wanting to drag her son into the glare of the tabloids. She turned to the group Mothers for Justice, an organization co-founded by prominent attorney Gloria Allred. Though Allred herself was busy with high-profile cases, one of her associates offered guidance on how to handle the legal intricacies. Vanessa's objective was never to humiliate Christopher in the press. She only wanted to ensure Ethan would not be left in limbo. Yet the media frenzy escalated. By the time Christopher decided to call her for the first time in 2 years, it was too late. The wheels of the court system were in motion. A judge would decide if Ethan deserved more than a monthly check, and if Christopher wanted to maintain the illusion that Vanessa was just the mother of my child, the legal reckoning might prove otherwise. Ethan, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him, continued to draw pictures of tall buildings with stick-figure families, perhaps unconsciously reflecting the father he'd never truly met. As the hearing date approached, Vanessa prepared herself for the trial of her life, one that would determine not just financial support, but who her son would become, and how he would remember the father who had once shut them out. At dawn on the day he received the court summons, Christopher awoke in his penthouse with a heavy sense of foreboding. The official envelope sat on his kitchen counter, a silent threat to the life he'd meticulously curated. The wording was painfully explicit. Vanessa was pursuing not only formalized child support, but also a possible custody arrangement. She was even open to shared custody if he wanted to be in Ethan's life. If not, she wanted the court to ratify that arrangement in black and white, ensuring he couldn't just reappear and disrupt Ethan's world whenever it suited him. Christopher's first call was to Caroline Bentham. The call crackled on speaker as he paced his living room, the Manhattan skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. Caroline's voice was calm, but beneath it lay a note of irritation. She had warned him this might happen. "Christopher, I strongly suggest we handle this delicately," Caroline said. "We should avoid making Vanessa seem sympathetic to the public. Right now, her legal position paints her as a devoted mother, just trying to protect her child. We can't have a media circus, especially not with your big development deal on the line." Christopher sipped his black coffee. His jaw clenched. "Is there no way to settle this quietly? I'd pay her more if she needs it. Shut down any further press coverage." Caroline sighed audibly. "We've tried that. She's not after hush money, she wants a legal framework for your responsibilities, and given your previous disclaimers and the hush funds, there's a whiff of unethical behavior that could come out in court." Silence settled over them for a moment. Christopher grimaced. He felt cornered, a sensation he despised. "So what's our strategy, Caroline?" "First, we aim for mediation. If we can show that you're willing to negotiate a fair custody arrangement, the judge might view you more favorably. If it goes to trial, we present that you've made consistent financial contributions. Legally, you haven't been absent, at least monetarily. That counts. We'll downplay the emotional side, highlight the fact you were providing for the child. Judges in New York sometimes factor in the father's capacity to provide a stable financial environment." Christopher almost spat out his coffee. "That's it. We just point out I gave her money. You were within your rights to manage your personal life as you saw fit." Caroline replied firmly. "Legally, you never denied Ethan was your child. And if she tries to twist this into an emotional sob story, we push back with the argument that your demanding career has made direct involvement challenging. The law can't force an emotional relationship." The call ended, leaving Christopher torn. He understood Caroline's logic. This was about protecting his empire, not his heart. But something in him squirmed at the idea of bearing his soul in a court. Money and power had always shielded him from that. As he stood at the window looking out over the city he'd conquered, he wondered if the empire was worth this new wave of anxiety. Meanwhile, Vanessa's team had its own strategy sessions. She worked closely with an attorney named Lauren Schultz, an associate recommended by Gloria Allred's group. Lauren had pored over every detail. The hush money, checks, the disclaimers. Christopher's legal team made Vanessa sign, and the text messages in which Christopher minimized her role. The goal was to show the court that Christopher not only neglected his parental duties, but also used his wealth and power to keep Vanessa at a safe emotional and legal distance. Lauren assured Vanessa that the crux of the argument was simple. We're not attacking him for being wealthy. We're holding him accountable for his responsibilities as a father. If he chooses not to be in Ethan's life, that's his moral failing, but legally we want to ensure Ethan's stability and protect both of you from any manipulative future moves. The disclaimers alone are suspect, especially if you signed them under duress. Duress. Vanessa remembered that day well. She had been 7 months pregnant when Caroline Bentham's assistant slid a set of documents across the table. They contained clauses stating that Vanessa would not press for custody or visitation beyond minimal levels, effectively binding her to accept child support in lieu of Christopher's active role. Vanessa only signed after Christopher's repeated assurances that the arrangement was best for everyone. She had been scared, overwhelmed, and financially vulnerable. Her mother's hospital bills were mounting at the time, and she thought maybe Christopher was right. Maybe letting him stay distant was the better route. Only now did she realize how manipulative that contract really was. Still, no matter how watertight her case seemed on paper, Vanessa was nervous. She knew Christopher's resources were vast. His high-profile connections ran from Wall Street to City Hall. Judges, politicians, and corporate magnates owed him favors. Rumors even suggested he had a close rapport with real estate giant Stephen Ross and had rubbed shoulders with philanthropic icons like Warren Buffett at exclusive charity dinners. If there was a loophole, Christopher's team would find it. Yet she could not back down. This was about Ethan's future. Once the court recognized Christopher as Ethan's father and set the terms of custody and support, Vanessa wouldn't have to worry about Christopher swooping in arbitrarily. She also hoped that deep down Christopher might change. Perhaps facing his responsibility in public court might spark some paternal instinct that had lain dormant. Her heart still held a tiny ember of hope for that. On the day before the preliminary hearing, Manhattan was drenched in cold rain. Lightning flickered across the skyline, mirroring the tension both Christopher and Vanessa felt. He stayed late in his office at Wellington Towers, finalizing details of a new venture, but his mind repeatedly drifted to the stack of court documents on his desk. She, in her small Queen's apartment, tucked Ethan into bed and told him that she had an important meeting the next day. "Will I get a new toy, Mommy?" he asked innocently. A pang stabbed her heart as she leaned in to kiss his forehead. "We'll see," she whispered. Little did either of them know that the hearing was only the start of a roller coaster that would test their boundaries, finances, and emotional endurance. The legal system would soon shine a harsh light on Christopher's methods, forcing him to confront truths he had spent years denying. And in the end, the one burden he never imagined shouldering would become the very debt that changed his life forever. The courthouse in Lower Manhattan stood like a grand stage where reputations could be made or broken. On the first day of the hearing, Christopher arrived with the confidence of a man used to orchestrating events to his advantage. He wore a tailored navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a subdued tie, an image of polished respectability. Caroline Bentham trailed beside him. Briefcase in hand, her demeanor every bit as steely as her client's outward poise. Media vans clustered outside, and cameras flashed the moment Christopher stepped out of his black SUV. He maintained a calm facade, ignoring the reporters' questions shouted in his direction. "Mr. Wellington, are you acknowledging paternity? Have you been evading child support?" His security detail formed a barrier, ushering him quickly through the entrance. Vanessa arrived shortly after, dressed in a simple grey skirt suit. She clutched a file of documents, her knuckles turning white. A few paparazzi snapped photos, but the crowd's attention gravitated toward the billionaire. The difference between their arrivals was stark. Christopher, with his entourage Vanessa, with only her attorney, Lauren Schultz, and a friend from the Mothers for Justice group, who offered emotional support. In the corridor, the atmosphere was thick with tension. When Christopher and Vanessa locked eyes, a flurry of shared memories passed between them. The Broadway date, the hospital suite, the hush money. But there was no friendly greeting, only a polite, almost icy nod before they entered the courtroom. Judge Harriet G. Friedman presided, a woman with a reputation for fairness and disdain for theatrics. Her salt and pepper hair and austere black robes lent her an air of unassailable authority. "Let's begin," she said firmly, scanning the room with sharp eyes. Case number 4579C, Vanessa James versus Christopher Wellington, regarding paternity custody and support. Lauren spoke first, outlining Vanessa's position that Christopher had indeed been contributing financially, but had withheld active participation in Ethan's life, effectively limiting Ethan's rights to paternal support, both emotional and logistical. Lauren presented evidence of the disclaimers Vanessa had signed, noting the possibility of coercion. Caroline followed, stating that Christopher had never denied paternity and had fulfilled the financial obligations as he understood them. "My client is a busy man," Caroline emphasized, her voice confident. "But he has never shied away from providing for his child. There has been no violation of any law or moral standard that compels him to exceed what was mutually agreed upon by the parties." A murmur spread through the courtroom's gallery. Vanessa cast a glance at Christopher, hoping to see some flicker of regret or humanity. Instead, he stared straight ahead, lips pressed thin. Lauren continued. "We're asking the court to establish a parenting plan that ensures Ethan receives consistent parental support beyond the monetary." She cited examples father and son visitation decisions on education, healthcare, and more. "Ms. James believes Mr. Wellington can provide more than just a check. If he refuses to do so, then let the court formalize that refusal, so Ethan isn't left waiting for a father who might or might not show up." Judge Friedman leaned over her bench. "Mr. Wellington, do you dispute any of these claims of paternity?" Christopher stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "No. Your Honor, I do not. Ethan is my biological son." An audible gasp resonated from the back of the courtroom. Some reporters scribbled notes, hungry for a headline. Vanessa felt her heart skip a beat. He had admitted it publicly. "Very well," Judge Friedman said. "Since paternity is acknowledged, the question now is custody and support arrangements." She drummed her fingers on the bench. "This might be resolved through mediation, as is common in family court. However, if either party insists on a full hearing, we'll set dates." Ms. Schultz. "Ms. Bentham, do you believe mediation is feasible?" Lauren turned to Vanessa, who nodded slightly. Vanessa wanted more than a forced public spectacle if it could be avoided. Caroline, too, inclined her head in agreement. She wanted to keep this as contained as possible to avoid risking Christopher's business deals. Both parties agree to mediation. Friedman confirmed, marking notes in the file. "We'll reconvene next week to review progress. In the meantime, I advise you both to remain civil. The well-being of the child Ethan is paramount. Here, the gavel's sharp crack ended the session. Outside, reporters hounded them for comments. Mr. Wellington, what are your next steps? Ms. James is Mr. Wellington, refusing to see his child. Vanessa felt suffocated by the crush of people, but her friend from Mothers for Justice guided her through the throng. Christopher and Caroline strode in the opposite direction, cameras chasing them until the black SUV whisked them away. For Vanessa, the day had been draining, but also oddly empowering. At least now, Ethan's paternity was a matter of public record. Gone was the identity of just the mother of my child. She wasn't simply a shadow in Christopher's life anymore. Christopher returned to his office, where a new crisis awaited. Word had already spread across financial circles that Christopher Wellington was distracted by personal legal matters. A top investor was jittery, demanding reassurance that nothing would derail the property development. Christopher delivered a confident phone pitch, claiming that the hearing was a minor family dispute, soon to be resolved. But when he ended the call, he knew the investor's confidence was wavering. He stared out over the skyline. The city lights shimmering like ghosts of promises he'd made to himself. The unstoppable titan was suddenly forced to confront a reality where neither money nor intimidation could fully solve the problem. Between the first court session and the mediation, Christopher's life became a pressure cooker. He spent his days juggling anxious investors and restless board members, all the while preparing for the family court mediation sessions. He had done well at compartmentalizing his life until now, but the walls were closing in. Even his CFO, Gabriel Nozick, noticed Christopher's erratic temper in meetings. Investors worried that the rumored scandal might snowball, so Christopher had to put on a show of unwavering confidence, despite the emotional tension pulsing beneath his polished exterior. Meanwhile, Vanessa juggled her job at the clinic and her online wellness coaching, all while caring for Ethan, who was attending a half-day preschool program. She felt nerves thrumming under her skin as the mediation loomed. Despite the constant swirl of anxiety, she found solace in the unwavering support from her family friends, and especially the Mothers for Justice group. Mediation day arrived, and both sides met in a drab conference room in the courthouse. A long wooden table, fluorescent lighting, and a single pot of burnt-smelling coffee set the stage. The mediator, an older woman named Marjorie Lee, tried to break the ice with a professional smile. "Let's remember this is about the child's best interests," she began. "We're here to explore if an amicable agreement can be reached." Caroline kicked off the proceedings with a measured tone stating Christopher's willingness to increase financial support. She slid a piece of paper across the table, detailing a substantial monthly figure, plus a trust fund for Ethan's future. Vanessa looked at it, her eyes scanning the large sum, but she remained composed. She replied calmly, "Money was never the main issue. We need clarity on custody and decision-making for Ethan." Lauren elaborated. "Ms. James wants a stable structure, joint legal custody so both parents can make decisions about Ethan's education, health, religion, and welfare. And if Mr. Wellington wants, he can opt for scheduled visitation." Christopher stiffened. "I can't commit to a fixed schedule. My business requires me to travel frequently." He glanced at Vanessa, then the mediator. "I'm not opposed to seeing my son, but it must be on flexible terms." Vanessa felt a pang. He was tiptoeing around fatherhood as if it were a nuisance. She inhaled sharply, reining in her frustration. "Ethan needs consistency," she said, her voice betraying her exasperation. Marjorie Lee cleared her throat gently, intervening. "Mr. Wellington children thrive on routine. Could you at least commit to a monthly schedule, which we could adjust if your travel changes?" Caroline offered a compromise. "We can propose a partial schedule, 1 weekend a month, plus an understanding that if Mr. Wellington is in town for more than a week, he'll notify Ms. James to arrange additional visitation." Vanessa felt this arrangement was still too vague, but Lauren squeezed her hand under the table, signaling that concessions are often necessary in mediation. They delved into the disclaimers Vanessa had signed. Lauren argued that Vanessa was coerced. Caroline contended it was a mutual agreement. The mediator took notes quietly, occasionally posing clarifying questions. It was evident to everyone that the disclaimers were a ticking time bomb if they went before Judge Friedman in a full trial. They smelled of undue pressure, especially given Vanessa's financial vulnerability at the time. By the third hour, a tentative framework emerged. Christopher would formally share legal custody with Vanessa, ensuring both parents had a say in major life decisions for Ethan. In exchange, Vanessa would not contest Christopher's right to maintain a flexible visitation schedule, provided he gave sufficient notice. Christopher also agreed to set up a trust fund for Ethan's education. The disclaimers would be declared void, acknowledging that they were signed under questionable circumstances. "This is progress," Marjorie Lee said, smiling wearily. "We can finalize details in another session or two." She then asked if both parties could refrain from discussing the case publicly to avoid media sensationalism. Caroline nodded. Vanessa agreed as well, stating she had no desire for the tabloid's attention. Before they parted, Marjorie encouraged Christopher to start building a real relationship with Ethan. Children need their fathers. But Christopher's stoic silence only confirmed Vanessa's fear that for him, the child was a checkbox on a legal to-do list rather than a treasure to be cherished. Outside the mediation room, Christopher finally approached Vanessa directly. For a moment, they were alone. "I know you want the best for Ethan," he said, voice low. "I'm not trying to be the bad guy here. But my life, it's complicated. I never planned on being a father this way." Vanessa searched his face, looking for any flicker of genuine remorse or affection. All she saw was turmoil. "I'm not asking for perfection, Chris. Just don't treat him like an inconvenience." He exhaled as if battling an internal conflict. Then, without another word, he turned to join Caroline, disappearing into the bustling hallway. Vanessa felt a wave of mixed emotions. At least he admitted that Ethan was his son, both privately and publicly. But building a meaningful connection with Ethan seemed to remain a distant priority for Christopher. In the days following, Lauren worked tirelessly on the draft agreement. She urged Vanessa to settle unless Christopher tried to slip any new terms in. After all, a guaranteed legal framework was better than an unpredictable battle in open court. Vanessa agreed, but a gnawing feeling told her Christopher might have more manipulations in store. She had witnessed how easily he maneuvered in business. Why wouldn't he do the same in a family matter? For Christopher, the best outcome was to finalize this, quietly appease the court, and reassure investors. But fate had other plans. Another storm was brewing, a financial one that threatened to unravel Christopher's carefully managed empire. And in ways neither of them could foresee, it would have a profound impact on everything about their arrangement, culminating in a twist that would shock them all. Christopher's empire began to crumble just as the family court case intensified. His luxury development on Manhattan's Upper West Side was hit with a construction halt after inspectors found foundational issues. A whistleblower suggested corruption, and soon the city's building department launched an investigation. Promotional material for the condos became worthless, while lenders, especially Morgan Stanley's consortium, panicked. Loan agreements demanded pristine financials now unattainable. Revenue froze, costs soared, and Christopher's liquidity vanished. Accountants scoured his holdings. Lawyers scrambled to shield him. Meanwhile, a piercing article in the Wall Street Journal exposed his legal troubles and financial missteps. Investors fled. Stock in Wellington Global Ventures tanked. Christopher tried damage control publicly, downplaying the situation as temporary delays. Behind the scenes, though, he faced margin calls and debt mounting fast. Amid the chaos, mediation with Vanessa was repeatedly delayed. She tried to be patient, but the lack of progress left Ethan in limbo. One day, Vanessa received a direct call from Caroline Bentham. Due to Mr. Wellington's liquidity constraints, Caroline said coolly, he proposes postponing the trust fund's initial deposit. Vanessa's heart dropped. So Ethan's future depends on whether your client can fix his failing projects. It's just a delay, Caroline replied. He remains committed. Vanessa turned to Lauren, who advised caution. If his empire's collapsing, we can't accept promises. We need protections now. Rumors of bankruptcy spread. In desperation, Christopher personally guaranteed loans to keep afloat, gambling his fortune. By the time the next mediation happened, he looked haggard, a shadow of the man who once dominated boardrooms. Caroline offered new terms. Lauren pushed back, demanding Christopher place funds in escrow. Tension spiked. The mediator paused the session. When they resumed, Christopher whispered, I need more time. Everything's falling apart. Vanessa's voice trembled, but remained firm. Ethan can't wait for your empire to recover. He needs something real now. The session ended without resolution, but left a sliver of compromise in the air. Another meeting was scheduled. 2 weeks later, disaster struck again. Violations at the site were worse than expected. Lawsuits from angry investors piled up. Stocks plummeted further. Bankruptcy whispers became roars. Christopher wandered his penthouse at night, tormented by thoughts of Ethan. For the first time, he feared not just losing his fortune, but losing his son's respect. If everything fell apart, what would Ethan remember of his father? A man with tall towers, or one too proud to be present? Christopher's world was unraveling. Within a month, lenders declared him in default. The luxury project was suspended indefinitely. City fines piled up, and investor lawsuits loomed large. His name, once golden on Wall Street, now trended online beside words like fraud, collapse, and reckoning. In the middle of this chaos, Christopher walked into family court again, no longer the commanding mogul, but a man visibly defeated. His suit hung loose on his frame. The usual entourage was gone. Only Caroline Bentham remained by his side, her face a mask of tight-lipped professionalism. Across the aisle, Vanessa sat beside Lauren and a few supporters from Mothers for Justice. She watched Christopher with mixed emotions, relief that Ethan might finally receive justice and sorrow at seeing a man crumble under the weight of consequences he once thought beneath him. Judge Friedman wasted no time. Mr. Wellington, we've reviewed the proposed custody terms. I understand your financial situation has changed significantly. Caroline stood. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Wellington remains committed to supporting his child, but requests reasonable accommodations given his current insolvency. Lauren rose to respond. Your Honor, while we understand financial difficulties, Ethan's future cannot hinge on business recoveries. We ask the court to establish enforceable custody and support orders that protect the child, regardless of Mr. Wellington's financial reorganization. The judge reviewed the mediation transcripts. The disclaimers signed by Ms. James were clearly the result of pressure, she stated. They are void. Ms. James, what outcome do you seek? Vanessa stood calmly. I want Ethan to have stability. If Mr. Wellington chooses to be in his life, I welcome that, but not on vague terms. Ethan deserves consistency, not occasional appearances when convenient. Christopher spoke for the first time, his voice quieter than anyone had ever heard it. I never meant to hurt Ethan. I just didn't know how to be a father in the middle of all this. Judge Friedman looked directly at him. Mr. Wellington acknowledging paternity is the first step. But fatherhood is more than money, it's presence and accountability. Do you agree to a visitation schedule, however limited, to give Ethan something reliable? Christopher hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Once a month at minimum. More if I'm in town. The judge continued. The trust fund must be created. If your assets are frozen, the timeline may shift, but Ethan's welfare remains your obligation. Then came the unexpected twist. The courtroom doors opened, and a man handed Judge Friedman a folder. She scanned it, and her expression darkened. What is this? She asked sharply. Caroline explained. Your Honor. Certain creditors are attempting to redirect Mr. Wellington's court-ordered support payments to settle his personal debts. They claim priority based on guarantees he signed. A ripple of gasps filled the courtroom. Vanessa's heart dropped. Friedman slammed her gavel once. This is a family courtroom. Let me make one thing clear. No creditor will leapfrog over the needs of a child. Child support is not optional, and it is not subject to seizure by business interests. Caroline started to protest, but Friedman cut her off. If Mr. Wellington tangled his business debts with personal promises, then he will carry that burden alone. Ms. James and her child will not suffer for his financial decisions. Christopher stood stunned, the finality of her words hitting like a brick wall. The courtroom murmured as reporters whispered potential headlines. Custodian of debt would surely be among them. Judge Friedman issued her ruling. Custody shared legal custody. Both parents would decide jointly on education, health care, and major life decisions. Visitation, minimum 1 weekend a month, with the option for more, with notice. Child support, maintained based on previous income, with future adjustments to be approved by the court. Support payments were prioritized above creditor claims. Trust fund to be created immediately with phased deposits, regardless of Christopher's bankruptcy. The court will not entertain further delays, she said firmly. Mr. Wellington, you've evaded emotional responsibility long enough. You may have called Ms. James just the mother of your child, but that child now has the law to ensure you are more than a name on a check. The gavel cracked once more, final and echoing. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed both parties. Christopher, silent, ducked into a waiting car. Vanessa walked calmly through the crowd, Lauren shielding her from intrusive questions. She didn't feel victorious, only resolved. Ethan now had rights structure and a father at least on paper. And for Christopher, there was no escaping the truth. He was no longer a titan of real estate. He was a man flawed, indebted, and finally accountable. In the weeks following the final hearing, Christopher's downfall became headline news. His real estate empire filed for bankruptcy, and a court-appointed trustee began liquidating assets. Investigations into construction fraud loomed, and whispers of possible criminal charges echoed through financial circles. Meanwhile, Judge Friedman's ruling was formally enacted. Legal custody, shared between Vanessa and Christopher, ensuring joint decisions on Ethan's upbringing. Visitation 1 weekend per month, minimum, with flexibility for more. Child support payments would continue based on previous income adjusted only by court approval. Trust fund. To be funded in stages insulated from creditors regardless of Christopher's financial woes. Vanessa felt both relieved and exhausted. Ethan finally had legal protections, and the manipulative disclaimers had been voided. But what saddened her was how hollow Christopher seemed throughout it all. He complied, but only because the court forced him to. Once a high-flying mogul, Christopher now lived in a modest apartment, far removed from the penthouse life he once flaunted. His yacht was repossessed, his luxury properties sold. Even his elite club revoked his membership. The man who once couldn't be touched was now financially stripped, facing litigation and media scrutiny. A few weeks after the hearing, Christopher appeared at Vanessa's door, holding a small stuffed dinosaur. "I'd like to spend time with Ethan," he said quietly. Vanessa, hesitant but open, let him in. Ethan, now nearly 5, eyed him curiously. Christopher knelt. "I'm your dad," he said, extending the toy. Ethan accepted it with a smile and a simple thanks. They spent the afternoon in the park. Leaves fell in golden waves, and Christopher, without cameras, lawyers, or investors, ran with his son across the playground. For once, he wasn't calculating his next move. He was just a father, uncertain but trying. Vanessa watched from a bench, tears in her eyes. Perhaps the court hadn't just imposed responsibility, it had offered Christopher a chance to discover something real. In the months that followed, Christopher's legal issues persisted. He attended depositions and met with attorneys trying to salvage fragments of his reputation. But once a month, he rode the subway to Queens and visited Ethan. Eventually, he began picking him up from preschool bit by bit, building a bond. Vanessa no longer saw him as the man who once called her just the mother of my child. He had hurt her deeply. But watching him show up, tired, humbled, and present, softened something in her. Ethan thrived. He laughed more, asked questions about buildings, and drew pictures of stick figures holding hands. One day he asked to see the towers his dad built. Christopher promised they would someday. And so a man who once measured success in millions now found value in a child's smile. He had lost his empire, but gained something harder to earn, the beginning of redemption. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of power, betrayal, and redemption. Christopher Wellington learned the hard way that no amount of money can protect you from the responsibilities of the heart. He sought to dismiss Vanessa as just the mother of my child, only to be humbled by the very debt he tried to avoid fatherhood. In the end, the courtroom drama forced him to see what truly matters: a child's laughter, a mother's unwavering resolve, and the necessity of facing one's obligations. If you found this story as captivating as we did, we invite you to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more stories just like this. Your support helps us continue bringing real-life dramas and powerful narratives to life. Don't forget, sometimes life's greatest wealth is found in what you cannot buy with money. Subscribe now.